Brian Books are back. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So you were the executive director of the Idaho Wildlife Federation, the oldest group of hunter, fisher, gamesmen, wildlife enthusiasts in the state of Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
You actually brought it back from the brink of death, which was amazing over almost a decade period. Which is such a cool story. And again, we've talked about that in the past. People should check that out. And you have since moved on to the American Bird Conservatory. No.
The American Bird Conservancy.
Conservancy. God.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you're the vice president of Advocacy and Threats, which is interesting. You don't do gain of function research here, which is great. But I wanted to connect with you about this before the bird flu. And I was like, let's talk about what are you guys doing? Because we have all kinds of I find it so cool that you can drive around Eagle and you look up and there are all these gigantic nests and you have obviously raptors of all kinds. And I don't know, I just thought I was like, wow, that's really, really cool. And I mean, we're named the city's Eagle, right? Which is, there's a thing there. But since then the bird flu popped out, people have gotten really concerned about it. We have this mass shortage of eggs. Bird flu has jumped over into cattle. I have actually a dairyman coming in today, an individual with that association. All really interesting stuff. So I wanted to I don't know anything about it, and people have been getting very worked up about it. And obviously it has impacts, or at least ostensibly has impacts on our everyday functionings with, food production.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the bird flu.
Yeah, so there's a few different things. I mean, there's impact on the ecology that the virus has, the disease that the virus causes, and sort of the virology of it. But the history is it's an influenza virus that viruses replicate incredibly fast. They have the capacity because of that to mutate and change their sort of ability to do damage to different species and cause different kind of levels of sickness, if you want to call it that. And I'm not a doctor, so obviously I'm not using the right terminology here,
Sure.
But influenza generally, they believe that, the first human recording, of the symptoms of influenza go back 1,500 years.
Gotcha.
And so, but when we jump forward to about 100 years ago, bird flu was the first time we started calling it avian influenza. Was recognized in bird die-offs, and likely it was from an existing virus that got into a bird that had another virus. And that's the worry about with cattle and the transmission to humans as well, is that oftentimes we have other viruses in our body, and if we get bird flu, those viruses kind of commingle their DNA. You can create a new, different kind of virus, and so that's kind of the worry about interspecies transmission.
And this is just a natural process of viruses, right?
Yep.
This is how they mutate. They crossbreed essentially and make something different and scary. And
they're crazy.
Whatever.
Yeah. Viruses are nuts. I have a very cursory understanding of this, but they're pretty wild from an evolutionary and life form standpoint.
Yeah,
but
right.
Avian influenza, as we know it in the modern terms, has probably been around for just about over 100 years. And the concern with it is that, they can disrupt the food supply, and that's happening as we speak. And it's usually an annual cycle. Wild bird populations are natural carriers of the virus. There's nothing we can really do about that. It's hard to inoculate tens of thousands of birds that flock together. It's most commonly found in obviously birds that flock together. Not all birds do that. So it's mostly found in water birds, so ducks, geese, and seabirds, gulls, and other animals like that, because the virus can be shed by saliva, feces. It goes into the water, and so you have a viral reservoir that can that virus can hang out in water. It's not
cesspool of nasty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've all seen duck ponds and go to Ann Morrison and take a dip and I dare you.
Yeah.
So and that's actually another concern. I hunt, and so I certainly don't want to consume birds that have avian influenza, because it could transfer to me, and it's the probability of it being dangerous to humans is low, but if you get infected, it has a pretty high fatality rate compared to other viruses like coronavirus and other stuff like that.
Wait. When you say it has a pretty high mortality rate, are we talking 1%? Or are we talking you have a 10%? This is a really bad virus. If you get it, it's 10%.
That's a really good question. I looked this up before I came here. There are very few. It's less than 10%, but it might be over 1%. I mean, that's why people.
So it's just a bad virus.
Yeah, and I think the worry is if you get like people can get bird flu and they don't always die from it, but the worry is again if you have another type of virus in you, another influenza, it's hard for it to transfer human to human.
Gotcha.
And so but if it gets involved with another virus that is more transmissible, and they share that part of their DNA, then the really deadly, H1N1 or H1N5, the avian flu variants, if they get a part of DNA that makes it very transmissible between humans, that's the concern that human health professionals have.
I remember the H1N1. People were flipping out about it. So is the H1N something, is that like the avian designation where it's like you've merged some avian flu that is now in a human?
Yeah. Again, I'm not a doctor here. I'm a
not a
virologist.
Yeah,
not an wildlife guy.
Okay.
But so in the H and the N both stand for a segment of the DNA code that they have that we found out really, I think in the 80s or in 70s when we were able to actually like have the tech to look at that kind of stuff. So they started designating like, okay, this is from the avian variant, this is the swine variant. And so they're obviously very deadly. And all of those viruses, they don't even impact the same bird species the same. And that's why if it gets from a bird to, let's say, cows, it may impact that specific strain might impact a cow differently as well. So every year there's if the H1N1 or H1N5 is the base DNA strand, there might be some other components of the virus that make it less deadly, less transmissible, especially among different species. So it changes every year. That's why we have, if you think about the flu shots every year, they have to study what's out there because it's different than it was the last year, or it might be more similar to one that was around 5 years ago, so it's the virology of it all. It's very complex. I should not speak to it, but I can tell you that birds are natural carriers. Wild bird populations are natural carriers, which is just a bummer. There are many diseases that wildlife carry. And so, really the only thing people can do to limit, to help, stop the spread of it is to kind of get rid of bird feeders where birds might congregate.
Oh, I had no idea there was like a civilian angle on this one. It's kind of like, hey, you are participating in propagating this virus by having these communal bird feeders that like they come in, you just get your dirty little birdie beak in there and get all nasty. And then obviously saliva and whatnot comes through.
Yep. Bird feeders, bird baths. I don't think it's as prevalent in the summer that I've seen in the fluctuations of the flu spreading among wild populations. But like I said, if you have a bird bath, you just need to wash that thing out and you can put new water in it. And that way you're not kind of creating a reservoir for this virus.
Man, that's such a bummer. We got one of my sons a bird feeder with a camera in it because he really likes birds, right? And he was so pumped about it. Now I'm going to have to go home and like break his heart. Thanks, Brian. Like he's just ruined a kid's Christmas.
Santa brought you the wrong gift this year.
Sorry, Sparky. This is bad. So it's bad for wild populations. Okay. And I care about wild populations that I don't interact with and I don't see. I don't even know if I could say I care about them like in the abstract, like, and I'm a terrible person for that. What I do really care about on my everyday is like, look, eggs are really expensive. And I also worry about dairy products, right? Because these are two staples within my household. Is the bird flu somewhat related to the mass spike in cost of eggs?
Yes.
Okay. So you have this wild population of birds, like, worldwide, that carry all these diseases. And this one sparks up out of somewhere. And it transfers into domesticated birds the exact same way it could get transferred, but better than it could get transferred into like cows. Because the cows is a cross species kind of thing. But chickens obviously are birds. So bottom line is that they're trying to manage this disease within chicken or like egg operations.
Yeah. Okay. Egg and poultry and meats, poultry operations as well. And so we'll probably see, you were already seeing a pretty significant spike in egg prices. I'm sure that'll happen with the meat birds as well. And I want to say, the disease itself is enzootic within wild populations. That just means it's here. It's endemic. It's not going away. It's now here and prevalent. It is also prevalent within farms as well. Like I said, if you're transferring chickens to market, there's chicken poop that can get on tires or cages, chickens poop in their cages. So it can spread farm to farm as well. Or like if there's a big farm that has a pond, wild ducks can land in there, domesticated ducks can land in there and poop in there, and you can eliminate, and they cull these populations. So if a chicken farm is found to have it, you want to like destroy those chickens because you don't want them to spread and further, disrupt the food chain.
How do they do it? Like what's the threshold? Like do they test 10% of the chickens, or is there some regulation where it's like, look, you need to test like a random sample of your chickens every single day?
Oh, it happens so fast. Like the chickens mostly, and birds, actually all birds, they don't really display to the high pathogenic type of virus. There's low pathogenic viruses of bird flu, and there's high pathogenic. High pathogenic, I think, is the one you need to worry about. They might not exhibit any symptoms, but they can be infected for 3 to 5 days and they drop dead. There's not enough time to test birds. You will just start seeing birds die.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so
naturally the food and the product from that stuff has been going out for that 3 to 5 day period. So if you have a large chicken operation, right, either for meat or for eggs, you have a concern where it's like, okay, there's a 5 day, it could be up to a 5 day window before we know a chicken's dropping dead from this problem. And that chicken was laying eggs or something the whole time.
Yeah. The logistics of like when you kill a chicken that's going to be, made into, whatever chicken sausages or breasts that go out to the market, or drumsticks or whatever. I don't know how long that takes, but if a farm starts to see massive die-offs, there's typically some authorities, ISDA, USDA, whoever, that you can send, a sample to, or they'll come out and take a sample and they can say, yeah, this is bird influenza or whatever else that's happening. And then usually there's like, they shut that stuff down, there's a recall, and there's a whole other process that happens. So yeah, I mean, it may take less time. I don't know how much time it takes to get for like the bird's products to like the market. Yeah, sure. To be honest, but avian influenza is very fast acting, and that might actually be a blessing in disguise, right? Like,
how do you mean?
Well, let's say it takes a month. They could be infected for a month, and then you have that chicken spraying viruses all over the place.
Yeah, sure.
And that could be like really detrimental, especially if people probably have already consumed it, unless it goes into frozen chicken nuggets or something. But if you're going to like a farmer's market or a fresh market, like never frozen, then yeah, that could be really bad. People could have already consumed it too.
Yeah, and that's the nature of long-standing viruses actually find a way to work down in severity, right? They're like, you have Ebola. Well, Ebola doesn't spread or it doesn't spread very effectively because you have such a high mortality rate. So it's like you got to be, if you're a virus and you want to make it the distance, you got to be bad, but you can't be too bad. Like you want to be bad that you, for instance, promote runny noses and stuff. So you get yourself out there into the world and people are touching you and stuff, but you can't be so bad that the person dies in a day. Because then it's like, well, my existence is over.
Yeah.
Like you need the host to actually stay alive. Okay, so we have this thing that exists in the environment. I can't, enzymatic. What did you say?
If it's in wild species, enzootic. But you can say it's an endemic virus. Yeah, it's around. It'll be around.
So we have this virus that'll be around. Thanks for helping me with that word. Somebody told me once, they're like, Love Brian uses a lot of $10 words. I'm like, that's a $20 word right there.
I'll turn it down.
No, you're good. It's good. Remember, like I'm 5. All right. So you have this that exists in the wild, and because it exists in the wild and spreads so rapidly within the wild, it's affecting not like one area and spreading out, it's affecting all areas at the same time. And then you have it actually affecting, because we have different species on different farm operations, you have it transferring from so you may have infected chickens within this, window, and, chicken poop and everything is used as fertilizers, all kinds of different things. And that then transfers over across species into cows, right? Which is how we're seeing the dairy market get affected by this. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct. And, like I said, viruses are really interesting because they're not like the definition of what we consider life. They're really interesting.
Yeah, it's wild. So, I was thinking about this right as you were saying it. So
it's hard to destroy them. They can stay in freezing temps, freezing water, and still, quote unquote, survive, or at least like their capacity to replicate will remain if you do things that would largely kill other life forms. And so, yeah, they can just stick around for months, even years. And the avian flu has been shown to be able to stick around for years. And so if you eradicate all the animals on a farm that may have had it, it can still be in the soil, the water, the whatever. And so it has, because of that, it has transferred to other species like cows. And that is bad enough. But the big concern, you can ask the dairy folks about this too, but the big concern is that it gets into a cow and then it mutates to be much more highly transmissible from cow to cow. I think the cows that have gotten it so far, they keep that under wraps because they're afraid of that happening, or they kind of try to clamp it down.
Not keep it under wraps.
Yeah, not keep it under wraps. They're trying to keep the virus in that one cow. Yeah, they're not trying to cover anything up. And so, but yeah, so and it's usually I think it causes like pretty high mortality in cows. And so yeah, like if we allow it to mutate and be transmissed cow to cow, or cows congregate together, because there's not a whole lot of cows hanging out with chickens, but there are a lot of cows hanging out with cows. That's the huge worry for the dairy industry.
That is a huge worry.
Yeah, and dairy cows are often, they're on dairy lots and feed lots. They're much more congregated than beef cows, which are typically out on pasture, prairie, rangelands.
Well, you hope they are.
Yeah, you'd hope so. Yeah.
I remember being a kid and learning about mad cow disease and being really worried about it, because one of the things that they were talking about is they were like, look, mad cow disease, it's not like you can heat up a steak or you can heat up beef and it won't necessarily kill that problem. And you get mad cow disease. That's bad.
Yeah.
Right. That's a real bad one. And I got really worried about it. I remember being like 18, like, oh no. I mean, I barbecued like every day. And that's always been a concern, which is like, okay, well, and I don't know what like chronic wasting disease is with, ungulates and things like that.
It's the same thing, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So even beyond that, like if you harvest a deer or something from the wild that has chronic wasting disease, you essentially won't be able to effectively cook that out.
You
right.
cannot, yeah.
Okay, so these are two really scary things. Wild that you still consume the wild game. It's fantastic. Good for you. But my question is essentially, this is an influenza virus. Does it lend itself to like pasteurization and cooking of meat so it dies off?
It does, yeah. There are some guidelines. Again, I eat mostly wild birds, and so there are guidelines, and I forget the temperature, but Fish and Game has this on their website. You can find it there, and I'm sure anywhere else online. There's a certain temperature you can cook it to that will destroy the virus, so it's safe to eat. Yeah.
So you eat primarily, but you're like a generalist hunter, right? So you have like a freezer full of elk or deer, and then you eat like
elk,
birds
deer,
as well?
Birds, fish. Love it.
You have it all. You really like it?
I love it.
That's awesome. And like, I would consider us friends. You've never offered me any. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you. Thank you. You gave a vegan reporter some elk sausage and you haven't offered me elk sausage. Like, I am a convert, bro. Like I'm one
true.
of you already.
I call it venison diplomacy. I introduce people to it. I'm not the only one who calls it venison diplomacy, but, and this is no dig against any ag raised meats. I think most hunters would agree, though, that we prefer elk and deer. There's perch that tastes better than anything you can get in the store. Wild caught salmon. I just love wild game. It's not through no intention, but my family purchases very little pork, beef, and chicken just because we have a freezer full of wild game.
God, I gotta get there, man. I gotta.
Yeah.
Get there. Like I've been.
Should hook it up.
Yeah. Listen. I gotta. That's another conversation for another day. So, Bob, a question for you, actually, about making sausage from wild games. Like, do you have to do something to augment the fat content of a sausage? Because like it would get, I have to imagine you get real dry real fast.
That's a super good point. I said we don't consume a lot of ag raised products, but we do buy, I buy beef fat.
I was going to say, you got to throw in like tallow or something, right?
Because elk, well, it depends on the animal. Big game, the elk and deer fat's not good. It's bad. Like if you cut off a substantial amount of fat, which if you find on a wild animal is great. That means that the habitat they're in is really good.
Food, yeah.
It's disgusting. It's best made for like other products, like Native Americans have been using it for the towel and reducing it and emulsifying it for like, skin applications and things like that, but it is not for eating.
I have a friend, Brandy, with the Eagle Chamber of Commerce, and she makes her own balm out of beef tallow.
Yeah. Yeah, beef tallow is a great source for that.
Just smearing the beef fat on. She's like, it's great, Matt.
It
I'm
is.
like, okay.
It is. However, fat on chucker, which is an upland species, but fat on geese and ducks. I mean, the French have known this forever. Like the best flavored fat of any wild animal is found on a duck or a goose.
Sure, foie gras fatty liver, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's like some of the most expensive, like kind of fat or lard you can buy is emulsified duck fat.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really good.
So the bottom line is you actually supplement when you're making sausages. You supplement with some beef fat so that you can get a sausage that will cook all the way through but won't dry out oppressively.
Yeah, it depends. A lot of people think it's sacrilegious to put any fat into elk if they're grinding it up into burger. By and large, I try to keep as much of the muscle groups intact because then I can roast it, I can cut it and slice it into steaks or do whatever, make fajitas. It doesn't matter. But I'm not mixing anything with it. The trim is what we call it. The stuff that you cut off that's like little weird muscle groupings here and there, has lots of tendons. You tend to grind up. Some people are like, I will not put it in any other animal fat because they're kind of purists. I like it. It helps keep the burgers together, adds a lot of flavor.
Sure.
So I'll put, 15% beef fat into my elk burger. I will put, 20% pork fat if I'm making breakfast sausage with some other ingredients. You're getting hungry, aren't you?
Dude, I've been burning so hot lately, getting all these productions out. I'll snag a Honeycrisp apple, which is the king of apples.
Yeah.
Like I'll snag a Honeycrisp apple, but like yesterday I had a Honeycrisp at like 7:45 in the morning, and then I didn't eat until 5:45 at night. And I was like burning, like I literally didn't have a single like chunk of time to go out and get food. So when you're sitting here talking like,
yeah. I mean, I'll make like sweet hot Italian sausage that I'll put pork fat in. And then there's other people who will just they'll put pork shoulder into their wild game, which is muscle content and fat. I don't do that. I just try to keep the protein, wild animal, and the fat, domesticated fat. Yeah.
God bless it. Okay. Thank you for answering that question. God, it's the best. My buddy Max actually has he's trying to popularize beef tallow in stick form because he thinks that beef tallow is a superior cooking fat, right? For cooking eggs or baking or things like that. It's like, but the problem is everybody has a workflow around a stick of something, right? People talk about like put a stick of butter and all of these things. And the tallow generally comes in like jars and also has a different melting temp than butter, right? And so he's making these sticks. He's like doing this whole big thing. But yeah, he's big into the beef.
I think it'd be great. Yeah, I mean, we save our bacon grease to cook with. That's emulsified pork fat. I mean, there's tons of uses for that stuff. Yeah.
Do you think we're gonna come to a point in like American consciousness when we realize that the dudes saving bacon fat and eating like really good quality but like extensive amounts of protein, it's like, dude, they were right. From like 1980 on, like they took it on the chin. They're like, I don't care what you say.
The dads were right.
The dads were right.
They keep that bacon grease under the sink. They were right. Yeah, dude. My dad was the same way. I was like, God, he's saving all. I mean, you can't dump it down the sink, but like, reusing it.
I met this guy. I met this guy a little while ago who's over 100. And he's this like lifelong at home. I met him in his office. We were talking about stuff. And it was like, here he's over. It was really funny because I was trying to explain to him what Instagram is. And he was like, how does this work? It's like, well, that's a really complex question, sir. But it's like sharp as can be. And this dude, like, I didn't have lunch with him, but I have to imagine he gives zero squats. He's like, I'm 100. I'm going to eat my pork chop or whatever and like move on with my life or whatever it is. The fat is just, the dads were right. Anyway, okay, look, I get kind of far afoot. There was another piece of the conversation where I really wanted to ask you about the farm bill. Now, I've been doing a lot of work with ag in the state of Idaho. And I have never met more interesting, incredible people. I had this conversation 2 days ago with this guy, Charlie Lyons, who was the impetus and founder of essentially the first wild rangelands fire protection association. And his story was just so bonkers, and understanding what farmers and ranchers are doing in the state of Idaho, truly to find solutions to problems that nobody else has a solution for. It's like awe-inspiring. But again, this brings a lot of interest. Like, wow, what else is happening? So there's a farm bill like on the national level, which I generally just focus Idaho, but I'm curious about how this would affect, what the bill is and how it would affect Idaho.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, like, Charlie's story is really like, it's great. It's very similar to a lot of like Idaho stories of people just saying like, tired of the dysfunctions, whatever they may be, however they manifest it. I'm going to solve it. I'm going to bring together the people that are maybe even causing it or facilitating it, and the folks who have the opposing view to just figure out a way that we can all get what we want out of it. It's happened with environmentalists and loggers and miners and ranchers to figure out forest issues, figure out forest fires. I mean, there's a lot of like really cool, like Idaho has led the way on some like forest management solution issues because we decided to stop fighting and talk to each other. It's not all settled and it's never perfect, but it's uniquely Idaho, and it is often referenced, this Idaho solution kind of mentality, when we look at other complex natural resource issues.
That's literally what I told him yesterday. It's like, this is such an Idaho story. And the question of what is Idaho has been, since I moved here, it's like, what is this place? Like, why? Like, why here? Why not Montana? Why not Wyoming? Why? And no, I'm not throwing shade on any of those places, but it's like, what's happening here? Why is this place the way it is? And I hear this story over and over and over of like, here was this problem, no one had a solution, and we invented one, right? And it's like, how? Like, how did you figure that? And it all comes from this, citizen-led solution and not looking to government to be the answer. And not that people that, look for government assistance with programs are a problem, but it's like the propensity of people here to just resolve the issue in a sophisticated, meaningful way that spans years of work. It's like, golly, man. Anyway, so super cool.
I do want to get to the farm bill, but my favorite example of that is, after the timber wars, rural communities lost a pretty significant lifeline to their economies in producing board feet timber products, especially. And the Clearwater Forest was what we call the timber basket in Idaho. It has lots of great quality lumber that can be produced out of it and pulled out of it. Folks got together, the Clearwater Basin Collaborative that brought loggers with folks who didn't want a single tree to be touched, and a few other interests, and they ended up quadrupling the timber output of that forest. And it's one of the highest producing forests in the West because people got together. And not everyone's happy with it. I'm sure people think that we could log more, but there's also people who think we shouldn't log at all in there. And so there was a pretty good compromise. Again, not perfect, but people got together to solve this issue, and that's a good example of people coming together.
That's beautiful. I'm gonna have to get you. I don't know if you know any of those people, but I'd love to talk to them and hear that story, because again, it's something that I see over and over, and especially for people dum-dums like me who move here and don't know anything about the state, understanding the nature of like I in fact participated in this accidentally. Like we had there is a problem with school administered technology in the state of Idaho, and I won't get into all the details. And initially I was like looking at the districts and looking at all these different things and trying to get people to do something about it. And eventually I partnered with an SRO, nationally recognized SRO, school resource officer, this guy Dave Gomez, who's a deputy and a police officer. Anyway, and he's this authority on this. We came up with a program to resolve the issue, and now we're running a bill as well to make it mandatory. And the State Department of Education is on board. Like the School Boards Association is on board. And I was talking to Charlie afterwards, like, man, like that's the exact same thing. Like we had this problem. Nobody was resolving it. The solution does not exist within the country. And like, we just got together and started fixing it. And the state of Idaho was on board. It's like, God bless it, man. Like, so cool. Anyway, that bill will come out soon. So
good.
Farm bill. Let's talk it. Farm bill.
Yeah. So the Farm Bill's first iteration came out in the late 1930s as a part of the New Deal to address a calamity of issues that had all collided beyond, the stock market crash and all that. We had the Dust Bowl. Everyone's heard of the Dust Bowl, but there was we didn't know about, certain farming tactics or behaviors that could strip the soil of its nutrients and anything like that. And so it's hard to produce certain crops as well. There was no real good coordination at a high level to organize who should be growing what and where. And a good example of why that's even important is if everybody in a certain region decided they wanted to grow corn, there's going to be a glut of corn. And when you have a high supply and not enough demand, the price falls out the bottom. Farmers go out of business. And so I think the first bill was passed in 1938. It was referred to as the Agricultural Adjustment Act. And it was meant to stabilize the food supply system, help with costs of the commodities that were being produced,
Right.
and provide some insurance and other things like that to keep farmers in business. It also provided...
Because the boom and the bust, the nature of the farming industry is the boom and the bust, if left to its own devices, would be incredibly deleterious to like the average farmer, right?
Yeah.
So we could say, hey, let the free market go, but it's like, that's fine. And we will see this boom and bust. And if we don't care about the farmers, and we're like, forget it. But the nature of the farming operations is like, okay, then all these people are going to go out of business through no fault of their own. And we will have food insecurity as the consumer end. So it's like, okay, I want to make sure that I have food when I go to the store or whenever. So like, this is a thing that we need to put in on a large level. Right.
Yeah. And there were also, within that first Adjustment Act, there was also some provisions that helped with conservation measures, this is a time in the U.S. when like the term conservation was sweeping the country. That same year, 1938, Idaho got its Fish and Game Commission. And this was this idea that an independent, apolitical body should make decisions for the benefit of wildlife, not necessarily, politics or people who own land or can afford it. Anyways, so conservation idea was, spreading across America. And what it would do is you could pay farmers to plant a hedgerow to prevent wind from causing as much damage as it could to remove topsoil. You could pay farmers to plant certain diversity of plants, wild species around your farm to attract pollinators. Farms need pollinators mostly.
Right.
And
I didn't know hedgerows had a pragmatic, were planted in a pragmatic sense, where it's just like, hey, look, hedgerow, stop the wind, like we're stripping our topsoil. Like that's a functional piece of them.
Yeah.
I thought they were always just aesthetic. I'm like, whoever thought that looked good, it was crazy, but like, whatever, what do I know?
No, you can still drive around Idaho. I mean, there's plenty of places I bird hunt. So because I do that, I'm not going to say where, but you'll drive by and you'll see like stands of cottonwoods and cottonwoods can grow really tall, right? And really fast. They can help create a wind buffer. And then underneath they'll maybe grow some smaller shrubs or pine trees. So not only does that help with wind and kicking up dust and all that, it also provides habitat for birds. And that's all wildlife. And that's why you see the outgrowth of this. So the Farm Bill passed then, immensely popular, both sides of the aisle. It was helping farmers, it was helping grow food. And then we started to realize, like, when we develop science, like ecosystem function, what do farms provide to us that we, can't really put into a dollar amount? A farm filters water into the soil and replenishes the aquifer far better than a parking lot, right? So there's all these things we realize that farms actually provide that are good for the environment, not only like shading and food growth and all that they're ag purposes, but we started to realize that, like, there are other reasons we want to keep farms around. And so every 5 or 6 years, there is a new farm bill passed. It was coined the Farm Bill, probably later than the first bill, like in the 50s or 60s or something like that. And it's grown to support a lot more than just like the cost fixing and helping farmers. It's produced, it's the single largest source of funding for habitat and wildlife conservation on the planet. It is a massive spending bill. Like I said, that comes every 5 to 6 years. And its dual priorities are really for agricultural production and natural resource conservation. It's almost entirely on private land. And so this is a program that puts money in landowners' pockets to grow, to do lots of habitat projects. We called them, it funds Farm Bill biologists, and then nonprofits typically are the ones who get that funding. There's 75% comes from the Farm Bill, and then 25% has to be matched by the nonprofit. One of the most popular, probably most notable names in the country that utilize that is the Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever. They have a lot of Farm Bill biologists all over the country, and so they will work with farmers to say, hey, your property is a good candidate for pheasant habitat if you want it. And so basically they work on behalf of the farmer, and they can go and the farmer can say, yeah, I have there's a spring over there and whatever. So a biologist will go out there and be like, we could plant this variety of wild species over here, and it can improve your property for wildlife habitat. We'll do it for free, but it also adds value to their property. But in certain instances, we will actually, from the Farm Bill, you can pay farmers to not grow certain types of crops and instead grow like habitat for wildlife. So, and that depends on the landscape. That's
Sure.
here and there. It has to be important for wildlife. You can't just be any property qualifies. Right. But that's why South Dakota, North Dakota are known around the world for the best ringneck pheasant hunting opportunity, because the Farm Bill has gone a long way to prevent farms from being sold, because not only from preventing farms being sold, but improving the quality of habitat on farms and around farms to where ringneck pheasants are just flourishing, and people, it's like $1 billion industry for those states. People come from all over the world to shoot ringneck pheasants over there.
Yeah, I didn't know that about ringneck pheasants, but I have been educated in recent years about, in contemporary times, our eradication of certain species, like the messenger pigeon or pigeon, right? Like that one, they used to have flocks like in the billions that would span miles and miles and miles, and like they'd like black out the sun. And that was the origin of the stool pigeon concept, because they'd essentially tie a pigeon to a stool and it would like flap around, the stool would, wobble, and then all these other birds thought that it was landing, and so all these other birds would flock down. They had these giant nets, but we eradicated them. And then it was specifically with ag, was it like the Carolina parakeet that we eradicated, which is this got like gorgeous bird. Like it's really beautiful. I grew up with birds. I really like parakeets and stuff. So was it the Carolina parrot or parakeet? I think it was the parakeet.
I think I honestly don't know. My bird history is not as good as the present times, but
yeah, but that was another one that was a rat. I need a guy. Like I need like a Jamie. I'm like, it's like Mike, can you just look at yeah, right. But that was another bird that in contemporary times we eradicated because it was bothering. It was eating crops from different farmers. And like, we'll never get that back. It was this gorgeous species of bird. Like, it's a real bummer.
The history of kind of westward expansion from the East Coast and with wildlife is not, it's a dark kind of history. I mean, our way of thinking was anything with talon or fang, we need to kill. And, skunks steal eggs. It wasn't just like, and we'd shoot raptors, we'd shoot eagles because they would kill things. I mean, it was just sort of a like, if it flies, it dies.
Okay, I was right. It's the Carolina parakeet. Look at that bad boy.
Yeah,
She's beautiful.
Right.
And it was eradicated officially. The last captive one, named Incus, died in 1918, and it was officially declared extinct in 1939. Super bright colored, all over the northern United States, North America in general. Man, so cool. And like that was just, could you imagine being somewhere in, like, we don't live in like a tropical area, but could you imagine being somewhere in this like gorgeous bright green and red bird flock down there, like, hey man, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. The passenger pigeon was one of the most abundant species on the North American continent, and it's gone because it's just, there was a time where we did not recognize the importance of the species play. And Aldo Leopold is sort of this like leader in conservation. If you haven't read his book, Ascend County Almanac, you really should. That's like every freshman biologist like required reading in college. But he talked about how we really, you look at a species and it's a cog in a giant system, in a giant machine, and you look at a single cog and you may not recognize the importance. And so you can kind of toss it away. And that was the way we looked at things back then. Like, we can destroy all the passenger pigeons, we can shoot everything and try to get rid of it just to make it easier to do business. And that's a antiquated and bad way of looking at things. I mean, you think about the use of our pesticides and the way that they are impacting our pollinators, insects. People might say like, well, what's the use of a bee? It's
What's the use of, we're dead without bees.
Yeah.
What are you going to hand pollinate? That was that Black Mirror episode where they had killed all the bees and then they made like artificial little, you know, AI driven drone bees. And then somebody hacked the AI drone program and like made the bees kill people.
Yeah.
Like, it was terrible.
Well, it's like, you know, if you care about the impact of avian flu on the price of eggs, just wait until lack of bees impacts the entire food industry, plant food industry, which is the basis of everything.
Right. Like, but without pollinators, we're dead. Like we're all dead.
Yeah.
Like there's no, what are we going to grow ferns?
Yeah.
Like it's not that we can't survive that way. Like we're never getting apples again. Say goodbye to cashews.
Everything. Yeah. It's shocking. And I think it's a bummer because I think we're living in times now where people can just be flagrantly misinformed or whatever. And they can kind of compare like caring about these things to just like environmentalism or some label. But these things are important, you know, open space, well, insects and generally providing a basis for our food system, open space, providing filtration for our water. There's a lot of benefits that having a healthy environment produces beyond this like warm, fuzzy, hippy dippy tree hugger thing. And there are certainly those types of people, but I think we all kind of need to realize that like we're all in this together. And when species are starting to drop, that's a harbinger. It's literally the canary in the coal mine.
That's a fair point. So with the Farm Bill, a new one again got passed, and that affects Idaho farmers specifically in that there are opportunities for them to essentially delay, take a rest on crop production, make auxiliary environments even in line with their production, right? Whatever they might be doing if they have a small space or an underutilized area that they can't, maybe their pivot doesn't hit. Yeah. They can grow different ecosystems over there, like micro ecosystems. And they get paid for doing that, things of that nature. Yeah,
you can, if you think of where there's lots of pivot irrigation, there's four corners that aren't really hit. You can pay, a farmer can get paid more money in their pocket, increase their margins a little bit. Otherwise, they're not going to. Typically, like most farmers are just there. If there's no financial incentive, they probably won't do it. And that's not a dig. That's just a reality. Most people. Yeah.
Like it's not a farmer thing. If there's no financial incentive for me, I generally don't just do things for things.
And it's their land. They should be rewarded for doing that. So the Farm Bill provides, there's a number of programs that the conservation, CRP, Conservation Reserve Program that can fund, planting those pivots that are otherwise going to be dirt or noxious weeds into, good diversity of species that birds can nest in or feed on or provide habitat for the insects that they feed on too.
Lava Ridge just got shot down, which was kind of cool. This not because I'm categorically against clean energy. I just hate that it was this national, federal government essentially mandate. Nobody in Idaho wanted it. It didn't benefit Idahoans, like all these problems, right? That's gone. But there was a lot of objection to it specifically because of bird concerns, right? Like, and they're like, yeah, look, you get clean energy, but it's not a zero cost here. Like you have real problems. Like I've never really understood that super well. Is it essentially just that you have these massive obstructions that are 700 feet in the air that birds don't, like they can't track the windmill turning and or they nest there and then it all gets destroyed. Like what is it?
Yeah. Let me broaden it out a little bit to talk my organization, if you will, just really briefly. So I'm the vice president, excuse me. I'm the vice president of Advocacy and Threats programs. The threats programs part of that is looking at the primary threats to birds. And one of those is the proliferation of energy development. Wind energy is a significant portion of that. The other threats include things like invasive species, feral and unowned cats, collisions with windows, stuff like that. And we're working to address those kinds of things too.
Collisions with like plane windows?
No, windows with buildings are primary,
gotcha.
But then cars.
Gotcha.
And it's pretty staggering. Like 1 billion birds die a year from colliding with windows. And there's super easy things that we can do to actually prevent them, like putting like these products that are called bird dots. You can stick them on a window and birds are like, oh, that's a wall, essentially.
That's like a moving thing. I shouldn't go in there.
Yeah. Because to birds, like a window looks just like more habitat there, and they don't see the window. And so if you put these dots on there, it looks like a solid thing. They're like, okay, I'll stay away, kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. So you would imagine doing that with like skyscrapers or something, like put a
It's
wall.
already being done.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so there was a very, not to get away from it, but just briefly, McCormick Place, like the spices that's based in Chicago, there was like 1,000 birds that died one day very recently during the spring migration. Got national news, international news, and we're like, Jesus, like our buildings are killing a lot of species of birds. Well, they just did a retrofit and they put those bird dots, and you only need to put them like where the birds are flying. So, and they're not flying super high; they're actually flying pretty low. You put them on those, and I forget what the parameters are exactly, but it reduced bird mortality by like 95%. That's all they need was just some stickers on there. And you can actually make these stickers look really good, or there's etched glass. So
Yes.
ABC actually has, we test glass companies will send my organization their type of glass. We slide it into a tunnel. We take wild birds that are caught in nets. We band them because we want to let them go. If we catch them again, we can get some scientific data. We'll put them through the tunnel and we create a threat factor, we call it, based on how the bird reacts to the window's sort of parameters, reflectivity, the etching. And so we actually have this database of science that now shows
Like a ranking.
Yes, it's exactly like that. And so New York City passed an ordinance that said any new buildings or any retrofitted glass has to include an American Bird Conservancy threat factor above X.
Oh, yeah. Wild.
So it's pretty cool to like, they're actually, there's a policy standpoint to it, but we actually are kind of on the ground testing glass for these companies who want to do the right thing. We also train architects on some of this data we have if they want to create bird safe buildings and stuff like that too. But one of the threats that we were talking about is wind energy, which all of these threats for birds have different impacts. For instance, cats, feral cats, and also people who allow their cats to go outside that are owned, impact all. They are the largest mortality cause to birds across the globe. They've caused extinctions in Australia of many birds, but also reptile and amphibian species. They are incredibly deadly to birds.
Yeah, they're tiny lions.
They're tiny lions. Yeah. They are, which is pretty amazing to think about. But they are a threat to all birds, mostly passerines. They're zero threat to bald eagles and golden eagles. Wind, on the other hand, is not a threat to all birds, but it is a threat to rarer birds like golden eagles, and it's quite severe. And so the American Bird Conservancy actually stands apart from a lot of environmental or conservation organizations in that we've been very vocal in our opposition to siting on wind projects. Offshore wind is a serious issue. The whole Atlantic seaboard was slated for proposals leasing for offshore wind. The Trump administration did put a 90-day moratorium on all renewable energy development to kind of reassess the environmental impact, which is good. That's a good thing. We actually do support that because solar can cover up grass and grassland habitats. You think central United States and eastern United States has a ton of savanna, Great Plains habitat. Yeah. Grassland species are some of the most at risk of extinction in America, and solar, that's also ripe for solar development. So we do need to be smart about how we develop this. And
you're emphasizing grassland species are the solar installation of these flat areas is actually detrimental to those species because they're not looking for shaded everything. It's like, no, just let the grass grow. This is where I hang out. This is where I make a nest. I populate, I find my food. Everything is like, if you put solar over that, obviously the environment's done.
Sage grouse, not going to be there. Lesser prairie chicken. Sage grouse are more western. Lesser prairie chicken is a huge issue. It's like the sage. It's not like bird people will flip out if I said what they were saying, but they'll flip out. But it's another indicator species, very popular. It's a game species. People hunt it and they don't want to see it go away. That's more prevalent in grasslands, and it's on the verge of extinction too. It's pretty sad. So we do need to transition to renewable energy. Energy experts are saying we need all of the above. It cannot just be renewables. It cannot just be solar. It cannot just be wind. It cannot just be natural gas or fossil fuels. It's all of the above. We need to have less centralized generating projects, and we need to have a smarter grid. So that means that we need to diversify. Renewables are a part of that. However, the renewable industry need not commit the same mistakes as the oil and gas industry has for the last 150 years. The oil and gas industry did make mistakes. We developed all over the place. We pumped it, and that has nothing to do with emissions. That just has to do with on the ground destruction of property, of habitat, disrupting wildlife and ecosystem services. Solar and wind does not need to do that. So the American President Trump has actually used talking points from the American Bird Conservancy about the problems that wind causes on birds. And so it's not a partisan statement to just say that, to admit that, yes, these do have impacts. However, there are some groups that are really gung-ho about building out as much renewables as possible because of the threat of climate change. And I happen to be in the camp that I think that climate change is real, and I think the data bears that out. And I do support renewable energy, but like I said, all energy generating projects, they all have an impact. There are appropriate places for certain dams and reservoirs. There are appropriate places for wind and solar. So we just need to be figuring out where those places are and building there, and not where it is a detriment to other issues, whether it's Lava Ridge, which had an impact, could have an impact on eagles. It had an impact. It would have an immeasurable impact on big game species as well. It would also have a social and economic impact on folks over there, and cultural impact, and they didn't want it. So there are good places to build. There are bad places to build for every energy project. You know, not everybody wants. I am a fan of nuclear energy, especially small modular nuclear. However, most people don't want even small modular nuclear in their backyard. They're like, put it out at INL, where it's really remote and away from a lot of people. So nuclear might be, well, it's safer now. There is an environmental cost if it's not properly disposed of, but it's more of a cultural cost. People are just kind of like, we remember the mistakes the nuclear industry has made. Right. So all of our projects, it's all about where is it appropriate and why.
It's amazing that people remember the mistakes that nuclear has made, and they don't remember the time when cars didn't have seatbelts.
Yeah.
Let's just get on in, kids. Or like power steering or headlights or blinkers or airbags. And it's like these industries develop, right? Like that's the nature. Does anybody remember the rotary phone? Like nobody remembers these technological things that we find so unbelievably antiquated and ridiculous, and had all these massive drawbacks. But it's like, no. You remember the 50s with like nuclear? It's like
they remember the lizard with 8 arms and 3 eyes. Like that.
Yeah, man. My favorite animal at the Academy of Sciences. I went to it a bunch when I was a kid. There's one in SF, and it was super awesome. And they had a 2-headed snake. It was great. And then I took it was wild. And then when I took my kids back, when I like grew up and had kids, I'm like, oh, we should take them to the Academy of Sciences. They had it embalmed because it had died, and it was people's favorite.
It was alive when you were there.
Oh yeah.
Oh, weird.
Oh yeah, man. Like I was like, oh my God. It was like licking its little tongues, and its head just came out, and then it had like one butt. I was like, yeah, it's awesome.
The Idaho History Museum used to, and when I was a kid, we used to go on field trips there. Used to have a 2-headed lamb. And it was stuffed, of course. It was not alive. Oh, I don't think they'd show that to kids.
Oh
that
my God.
Be a little weird.
That would be so lit. What do you mean it would be a little weird? Why wouldn't they show it to kids? Nature's wild, kids.
Yeah, at the time, I probably would have been absolutely fascinated by it. But thinking about it as an adult, I'm like, maybe that would traumatize kids. But I don't think so.
No, we watched The Land Before Time.
Right.
Don't you remember that movie when the mom dinosaur dies defending him?
Like, thinking about it.
There's a reason we're all in therapy, bro.
That's right. Yeah.
Those movies were rough.
Yeah. The 90s generally, I picked up on this, like a lot of dead parents in 90s children's things, like orphans, like what was with that?
Yeah.
Like all the kid characters were either orphans or one of their parents had passed away, and there's like a step person in the picture. Yeah. It was odd.
Could you imagine making a movie now like The Goonies, where like one of the main heroes is like Quasimodo in the end?
Yeah, hey you guys. Love that guy. What was his
Sloth.
name? Yeah.
Sloth loves Chunk. Like he couldn't even talk.
Yeah.
And he was like some incestuous child of like the bad guys. Like, and by the way, like love the Goonies, but like do the truffle shuffle.
Oh,
like you can't.
You're not gonna.
You ain't getting away with the truffle shuffle now.
You're not gonna make a Chunk do the truffle shuffle today. Probably not.
Yeah, he was a Chunk. Was that Sean Austin? That wasn't Sean Austin. No, but he was in the Goonies.
Yeah. Both of them were.
Yeah. Chunk went on to do have an acting career, didn't he?
Oh, really?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
We got to find out where those guys are. Did you know the guy from from Christmas Story actually lives here.
I had heard that. Yeah.
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 Dad's going to kill Ralphie.
Ralphie.
Yeah. So Ralphie, shoot his eye out. He lives like within 5 miles of here. I don't know where he lives
No
exactly.
way.
Yeah. I actually
Get him on.
I think next Christmas I'm going to try to get him on. Like he's just, he's iconic. He's kind of like, he'd kind of be like Elvira around Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah. Like do it up.
Do it up, man.
Come on.
Brian, thank you for the time today. I know it's a working day for you. You came in here. I appreciate it. Is there anything you want to hit? Because again, I really want to hit the bird flu and the farm bill. Anything else in particular right now? I'm sure we'll have more conversations in the future.
Oh, geez. I don't know. I think we're good. Yeah.
Listen, we're good. We'll come back. We'll keep doing this and hook it up with some sausage, man. Like, I want some game.
Man.
You're giving it to the vegans. You don't give it to your boy, Matt.
You know what? If you have mobile recording stuff, you could come to my house and we'll cook a bunch of stuff. I'll cook you fish, birds, big game, small game. We can eat it all.
I've been doing a lot of food shows with local producers and like processors. There's no reason we can't do a food show for like, this is how you cook an elk steak.
Oh yeah. Elk steak is just, that's the entree. We can get much more. We could do chucker curry.
Can we get like little meatballs?
Oh,
chucker curry.
of course we can.
Of course. It's fantastic. Thank you for coming in, sir. I appreciate you. Let's do it again.
All right. Sounds good.